Welcome to a podcast from the Creek Church.
Come on now, people. Come on now, people.
Let's go.
Come on now, people. Gonna praise the Lord.
Come on.
Church. Come on now, church.
You gotta get loosened up.
Church.
Get ready.
Here we go! Yeah.
Do my stretches this morning.
Here we are in person for the podcast from the Creek Church. In person for the first time.
Yes.
Breathing each
podcast.
other's air.
Yeah.
Us.
This is the first time this has happened ever.
Us
Yeah, this is the
together
first time, yeah.
in a room. So welcome to a podcast from the Creek Church. We are, if you're joining us fresh and anew, we are
It's a new season.
Transitioning from an old name. And
name.
during an episode, so what happened is we named our podcast, and we're three guys who work for a church called the Creek Church in London.
Mm-hmm.
I won't tell you that it's
England?
London. That it's Kentucky.
Okay.
We'll just leave it at London.
Okay.
So we won't tell them that. But we had this great name.
Mm-hmm.
It was so good
Mhm.
that our leadership said, we need that name for something else.
Took it.
They took it.
Stole it.
So we're currently in litigation.
Yeah. I
No.
won't stop. I won't stop. I'll give everything I own to get that name back.
Golly.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're trying to get the name back, or at least get paid.
Oh, yeah. I'll take that too.
I would actually prefer to.
Yeah. No. So they grabbed that name for another purpose, a midweek devotional that we do, which the name was much more appropriate for anyway.
Yeah.
And so on one of our podcasts, we said, I guess this is just a podcast from the Creek Church. So that's where we're stuck right now.
Just a couple of three guys.
Just a couple, three guys.
Three guys. We're working hard for a name though.
Yeah.
But
we're
we
working on it.
don't want to settle.
We don't want to settle.
We don't want to settle.
So we're the kind of fellas that we don't move forward. We don't launch something until we fully think it through and make sure it is what we want it to be. We don't want to be in some kind of situation where we start something and then the name gets changed like 3 or 4 episodes in.
Yeah.
No.
We don't do that.
We'll do whatever it takes to make sure that doesn't happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on. That's who we are. There's a new name coming soon, and we're going to keep working on that. But for now, we're a podcast from the Creek Church. My name's Austin Upchurch, and I'm here with Zach Seiler
That's me.
and Lance, the Big Cat Freeman.
Hello. Hello, all.
So literally, this is the first week that we've come back to our offices after the COVID-19 quarantine situation that we've all been dealing with. So this is the first time, like
Yeah.
we said, that we've all sat around the table and had conversation.
Yeah.
We've been doing this via Zoom, which has been fine.
Yeah, I mean it's fine. It got the job done.
It got the job done, indeed. Except Lance was always really afraid he was going to talk over us, and there was a little delay.
I don't like talking over people.
You what?
Huh?
So it's interesting. How have you guys been feeling now that things are at least taking steps back toward normal, coming back to work? What's been interesting, or as far as dealing with that?
What's been going on? I don't fully.
What's been going on? Yeah, you don't know?
Life hasn't changed for me very much.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I like breaking rules.
So you haven't been following the guidance?
No, I have.
Just not everything.
I don't even really know what all the rules are. I feel like they change all the time.
That's true. That's true.
You know what I mean? They're kind of triple stamping and double stamping on us.
But you are, I guess in this world, they would call him bivocational.
Yes.
So you have another job, and that job requires you.
I feel like that's rare for church folk.
Bivocational?
Yeah.
That's not.
Yeah,
Oh,
I think
okay.
that's it feels like that's more of the norm at least in our
In
area.
our area, for sure.
Yeah. That was a joke.
Oh, okay.
That was for sure a joke.
It went way over my
I'm sorry.
We're going to work on joke telling after this.
I was completely kidding. Yeah, so, I mean, the thing that I do is property management, so I'm able to work from the office that I work in. It's just myself and my dad, and so I'm able to basically keep the books in order, make sure everything's good, and then be available for phone calls and different things like that. So it didn't really affect me too much.
Mm-hmm.
The church stuff, obviously, it affected that greatly, but my personal, my main source of income did not change too much as far as like what I can do on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
So it feels like when I'm driving around the community, that is not that much different because people are still driving and doing
Yeah.
stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
there's still some businesses working. Basically, just like the restaurant thing, and
Right.
seeing people with masks on is obviously a big change. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Have you felt like when you're out, it feels a little more sparse, or do you not even notice that?
I don't notice it at all.
See, I feel like I'll notice that. Like when I'm driving around, I live in Somerset, and I feel like when I'm driving around on a normal weekday, it's not nearly as busy as it normally is.
Like on 27.
Yeah.
Maybe I can see that because it's such a hub, that
Yeah.
road. But
Yeah.
like the only time I really notice is the interstate is
Okay.
a little bit less because people aren't going on vacations
Mm.
and
Yeah.
traveling as much.
What about you, Zach, coming back to the office?
If I'm gonna be completely honest, I was not all that excited about coming back. Not because I'm scared to come back, and I don't have any fears about coming back. And honestly, I love my job so much that used to every job I had. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, but I would get these like heavy Sunday depression, right? Like, cause you got to go to work the next day, and like I don't want to go to work. But I've never had that since I've worked here, so it's a huge blessing. I've never felt like, man, I don't want to go to work. But and so I knew I'll get back in the swing of things. I'll be perfectly fine. I'll be with my friends, hanging out, doing our job like we always have. It'll be fine. But I will say, if I'm being honest, I miss my little girl and my wife so bad. I just want to go home and be with them. I want to see Sadie come running around the hall like yelling "Daddy," and I just I don't want that. And so I was having a conversation with Ariel a couple weeks ago when we were like in the midst of the quarantine thing.
Your wife, Ariel.
Yes, my wife Ariel, and I was just saying I think this is what life was supposed to be all along, like spending the majority of your time with the people that you love so much, and you're just living life together. You don't have to go somewhere else or do something else, and this is just my life is watching you guys live and sharing it. And I still believe that to some extent. I understand there's responsibilities and I got to provide for my family and all that stuff, but I miss just being with them every day.
Yeah.
I never got that. Like, I spent 2 weeks with Sadie when she was first born, then went back to work. And I mean, 8 weeks, 9 weeks with her every single day has been amazing.
Yeah.
Been a huge blessing. And I'll miss her.
Yeah.
I miss her bad.
So you're kind of wanting to just live off the land.
I could honestly, boys, I'm telling you what.
Be honest, please.
If I went down this road too far, I could be an off-grid guy, no problem.
Your grandpa is, isn't he?
Pretty much. I mean, well,
What does he? Tell me something he has said about this whole situation. I'm interested. Has he said anything?
I haven't got the chance to talk to him.
What?
No, I don't want to get him sick.
Oh, yeah.
okay.
He's
That's
older.
true.
He's in his 80s, and so I don't want to get him sick. And so I do check on him frequently with my mom, like, hey, what's Papa doing? Same old.
Yeah.
Same old.
Not
Same old.
affected.
Nothing changed for him. But he's not off the grid. I mean, he's got cable. I mean, we're talking about Matlock.
He watches Matlock.
He ain't going without Matlock.
Tennis.
He ain't going without the tennis channel.
Yeah.
And he's not going out without the news. He loves the news.
Yeah.
But I was telling my mom just a couple weeks ago, I said I could just move back down there where you guys are and live and not worry about anything and be perfectly happy. And she said, oh, really? I said, yeah. And then a couple weeks later, we were having a conversation. She said, I didn't tell you this when you said this, but I can't tell you how happy it made me when you said you could live here with us and be perfectly happy. I said, well, I don't think I'm going to do it.
Yeah. That was still nice, though.
Yeah, it meant a lot
That's
to her
cool.
because I guess it made her feel like, maybe we're enough for you to be around all the time, which is sure.
You said something really funny to me the other day when this thing first like happened. You were talking about like there was a toilet paper shortage and stuff. You should tell the people what you said about in Clay County how they're going to respond to this COVID thing.
I don't even remember.
Basically you're like, they're not worried about a virus at all. You know,
Yeah, they're
you don't
probably
tell
not.
them they got plenty of toilet paper. If I need to get toilet paper, I know where to go.
Yeah, I would say that the majority of people in Clay County probably haven't even changed that much about what they're doing, other than school. Like they had to stop school for a while.
Yeah.
My little sister told me yesterday. She said, "I didn't learn anything. I'm going to be a junior in high school. In the back half of my sophomore year, I didn't learn a thing," and she was pretty concerned about it. She wants to go back to school. So
Sounds
maybe
like
that
high school to
changed.
me.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, no kidding.
There you go. But coming back to work has been fun. I mean, getting to see everybody, getting kind of back into a little bit of the swing of things. Still a little bit not the same, but it's a great place to work, so it's been okay.
So basically, he just said he wants to be with the people he loves, and he's not with them right now.
Oh man,
Boys, if
come
you want,
on, dude.
if you want me to tell you that I love you more than my wife and kid, I won't.
Listen, it's close though, is it not?
You guys, I do love you.
Okay.
I love you.
Well, for me, it's been good. It's been refreshing to be back. Like I said, I only left my house a handful of times in 9 or 10 weeks. So having the interaction, being around the people, I've definitely enjoyed that. I didn't really have a problem at home as far as being there, working from there. But I definitely feel some of the same, maybe just kind of withdrawal symptoms of all the time that I was able to have with my family and with my girls, my wife and 2 girls, because, it was like lunch. We're having lunch together every day now. Even if I was working, I'd set up an office in my basement, so I would go there, close the door, and work. But I could come out and see them real quick, or the girls might run into the office and interrupt a meeting or whatever. It was like okay with everyone, and that's nice. That's fun. That feels good, So I definitely missed that stuff. But there's also a sense of like I was ready to get really like back to the grind and back to work, and not that it almost seems as though the workload increased for me, though. It actually doesn't seem that way. It definitely did increase for me during all this with all the production stuff we were trying to do and media we were putting out. But just getting back to the office and being around people, and it feels like now for me things can progress again. Like it feels like we were sort of stuck in a sense. Like I know we were trying to still grow and learn through the process and from what we had experienced in that. We talked about that 2 weeks ago on the podcast. But there was still this feeling of like, okay, we're kind of trapped in this mode right now. And I don't like that feeling.
Yeah, kind of treading water or something,
Yeah, I don't like not having control.
Yeah.
Which is another podcast in
Well,
itself.
you lost control of your hair and then you shaved it all off. The people haven't seen it until now.
Yeah.
You look like you're about to go to, report on the football team your freshman year or something.
He looks like a freshman to you?
Yeah.
Wow. I did have this beard when I was a freshman.
Well, I mean, there's beards in college.
No, I had a mustache, though.
Like a legit one that you thought it looked good?
Oh, yeah.
You thought it looked good.
Junior year, I had a full goatee, baby.
I've seen some of those goatee pictures for sure.
Yeah, it's nice.
I had a goatee for prom senior year. I looked like such an idiot.
What a call.
Zach's basically rocking a goatee.
Basically, and a neck.
And a neck.
You got a kind of a chin strap thing going
neck,
on.
beard, and goatee.
Yeah.
The cheeks are so sparse that it's like, let's just trim that back.
Trim it back.
You've been trimming it?
Yeah, the cheeks.
So you've gone almost, if you shave your mustache right now, you're almost could be like a Amish or Muslim sort of beard style.
All neck.
Dude, think about this.
Whoa.
He would have the strongest soul patch if he wanted to do it. Like a Jeremy Camp, like an old Jeremy Camp. Like, you used to have that thing, didn't you?
I did.
You could really rock that, right?
I don't think just because you're able doesn't mean you should.
That's true.
That's a lesson that we should learn right now.
Yeah,
just because you're able does not mean
all
you
things
should.
are permissible, but not all things are beneficial.
That's the truth.
Wasn't it Paul that said that?
I think so.
Some guy.
So last week, guys, we talked about manipulation in the church, and in doing some research for that conversation, we come across a video on YouTube by a person whose name on YouTube is Faith Free. And he kind of shares his experience in this video of leading worship at a church, and he comes to the conclusion that because of their preparation and because of their desired outcomes as individuals and as a corporate organization, as the church, that they were more in control of what was happening in people's lives and hearts than God was, that they were essentially manipulating people to respond the way they wanted them to. Mm-hmm. And so he, from that, infers that that the church and church music manipulates you to respond the way that they want. And so ultimately, because of that and other research that he's done, he's become an atheist. And so this is from his point of view. And so we talked about that last week. It was a good discussion.
Yeah.
He goes on in that video to talk a little bit about his feeling that the church as a whole targets a particular group of people. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's take a listen real quick to that clip.
Without him. There is one group who by nature is affected most, and they're the ones being specifically targeted in church, the emotionally vulnerable. That always includes young people, but more specifically, is anyone going through a difficult stage of life, dealing with an emotional low point and struggling to find help or answers. If your church evangelizes anything like mine, services are often planned specifically for them. Turn on your local soccer mom Christian radio station, and if you can make it halfway through whatever vanilla cliche CCM song they're playing, you should hear some verses with some really sad, self-deprecating lyrics. That's on purpose too. It's the same formula as most sermons and worship songs with none of the subtlety. Let's go back to the hypnotic ambience from earlier.
Yeah, it's probably good. So essentially, he's saying that the church targets the emotionally vulnerable. The emotionally vulnerable. So we knew for a couple of days this is what we were going to talk about. So where do you guys stand as far as that premise is concerned?
Simple answer, yes.
Yes.
I like that.
Okay, yes what?
Yes, the church targets emotionally vulnerable people because I think every human being is emotionally vulnerable, and humanity is the target of the church. So, yes.
So yes, but that's not a problem for you.
It's not a problem for me because if you're saying, I would say this. He mentions in the video that his church planned service specifically around targeting emotionally vulnerable people, and then he mentions hurting people or in a low point or something like that. I've personally never been in a meeting where we said, hey, let's have a service specifically geared for this person that's going through a divorce, or this person that's going through a drug addiction, or any whatever low point you want to put in. I've never been in a meeting like that. I've definitely been in planning meetings where we said, hey, let's talk about family. Family, everybody, it has their ups and downs. Everybody goes through ups and downs in family. Let's talk about family. So we talk about things that we think people can connect to or might need help going through. But I wouldn't say I've been in a meeting where we said, we know this specific group of people is emotionally vulnerable. Let's get after that. And so I can't relate to that, what he was saying about his specific church. But I will say, I think the church as a whole is called to hurting people. And that means we're called to everyone, because at some point in your life, you are hurting. And that means the church is for you, because there's the truth that Jesus can help, that I believe. And so I would say, yeah, I agree.
So yes, the church targets the emotionally vulnerable. What do you think about that?
Oh, yes or no?
Responding
well,
to Zach's.
I think what Zach's saying has a lot of truth to it. I think that you can't get through life without, you're going to take some lumps, and there'll be some scars. If you're a human being on earth, you're going to have, stuff that you're running across, whether you're a Jesus follower or not. So it's just a human condition, right? So I think that the emotionally vulnerable, I say that people are emotionally vulnerable whether they realize it or not. You're open to being attacked on some level and it messing with you emotionally, so I don't think it's presented as a bad thing, like, oh man, you're really trying to find a target market and really go after them. I don't think it's a bad thing to plan a service around basically just trying to lift people out of something. If they're emotionally vulnerable, maybe there's extremes to the level of being emotionally vulnerable. Some people more than others. Those people may be more receptive to what's happening in a service than others, but I don't know if that's something to be ashamed of necessarily. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like trying to target your service or whatever thing, production, whatever that's going on the day, to help, because the goal is to help people from one place to another. We talk about next steps all the time. Mm-hmm. Help them take a next step on some level to find some sort of, stability in their life, or something they can hold on to and apply with them, whether they're in the church forever or they move somewhere else or whatever. They can take it with them, something they can take with them and learn. I don't know. I don't think my answer is I don't think that emotionally vulnerable targeting people like that necessarily is a bad thing.
So you would both say that the church does target those people.
Yes.
I would say I wouldn't say the church targets emotionally vulnerable people like that. I would say the church targets people, and people are emotionally vulnerable. So in so saying, yes. We also target extremely healthy people. You know, like we target them too because they're humans. Any person that has a beating heart is a target. That's what I would say, and that includes emotionally vulnerable. That includes people who you know, maybe they got all their stuff together. Whoever that is, I don't know.
Would the opposite
I don't know anybody
be
who does.
emotionally stable? Like, what would you even say what would be the inverse of that? Vulnerable.
Emotionally healthy, I would say.
Just healthy?
That's what I'm saying. Is everyone is emotionally vulnerable at some point. You could be emotionally vulnerable at a part of your day.
Right.
You know what I mean? You could be emotionally healthy, and then you have a call. You know, let's say you get a test done, some kind of medical test, and you're waiting on that call, and you feel the pressure of that or the anxiety of that. In that moment, you would be classified as emotionally vulnerable.
Sure.
You're waiting on this call that has a lot of impact and implication on your life. You're emotionally vulnerable. So during your day, even if in general you're emotionally healthy, you're also emotionally vulnerable. And so, I mean, to his statement, I would say, like I said, yes, because the church targets humanity, any human.
How would that be a bad thing? I'd love to, you know what I mean? Like, what would be the bad side of that?
Well,
targeting emotionally vulnerable, in quotes.
Yeah.
What's the negative side of that?
Well,
got
I
any
think
thoughts?
it carries the connotation that we are taking advantage of their situation, that we are gaining from them because they are emotionally vulnerable, which to me, vulnerability just indicates that it's insecure. It's not secure. It's vulnerable. It's open for attack. It's not safe at the
But what's
moment.
the gain?
Well,
The gain is followers. The gain is
People that show up?
Yeah, followers. The gain is offering. The gain is livelihood.
The
all of that.
context is manipulation.
Right.
The
Yeah.
context of the video is
Sure.
you know, the church is manipulative, and so the best person to manipulate is somebody who's emotionally vulnerable. I can get them to do anything because I can offer them a better way, and so they're willing to do what I say. And so there you go. And so that's the context.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, but the whole definition of manipulation that we talked about last week is an evil intent. And you just said offering something better. So if you're offering something better, I don't see where the evil intent is.
Well,
behind
unless you stand on the side that faith isn't better, that faith is a farce, then it's all fake. And to offer them anything other than the truth, which in this fella's opinion is, you know, Christianity is kind of a bit of a hoax. That's not better in his opinion. So that would be the.
Do you think it centers around the idea of people don't have the ability to think for themselves on any level, or at least these people that we're talking about? Because at the end of the day, they have to choose to make decisions to show up. They have to choose to give. They can be encouraged to show up or whatever, but at the end of the day, they have to make that decision for themselves. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, in a sense, yes, people are making decisions for themselves, but that's where the mindset, I would say, of any kind of cult following is you've been manipulated to make the decision yourself, even though if outside of that context, you wouldn't make that decision. I think that's kind of the bend there is people try to say outside of that context, you wouldn't have made that decision because you were persuaded in a way that was unfair to you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think again, we talked about persuasion last week a little bit, and so the context, like we say all the time, context is king, you know, and so in the context of something, it kind of helps you understand what this conversation is all about.
Do you think this all is a product of it makes people uncomfortable to think that like the church can advertise? Because outside of the context of driving past or sitting on the couch and watching the Papa John's commercial, you might not have bought that Papa John's pizza, but it enticed you. It's like, oh, I want to do this. Is that what makes people uncomfortable?
Because it's the church that does
Any
that?
sort of advertising from the church is like gross to people or something?
I think it's somewhat taboo or something. You know what I mean? It's like it's off-putting for some reason. I think because historically, like we talked about last week, people have abused the role. People have, targeted emotionally vulnerable to manipulate them to do things that they wanted them to do that weren't of God, that were for the leader's benefit, not for their benefit. And so I do think people's guard is up. They are not wanting to be one of these emotionally vulnerable folks who gets taken advantage of or gets used for the benefit of another person. And so I think that anytime, you've got certain people who, if the church talks about money at all, it's off-putting to them.
Yeah, they probably don't give.
Probably
Seriously, if it offends you or hurts your feelings to hear anything about money,
not. Right.
you probably don't do it, and you feel guilty or shamed for it on
Sure.
some level, and you don't like that feeling, so you're going to push back.
Or the idea of the church marketing, like, I recall first having conversations about that terminology probably 8 or 9 years ago, and there were people who were very uncomfortable with pairing the word marketing with church, because for some reason we separate the corporate world and the spiritual world, and we try to separate out, well, these things are spiritual and these things are secular or whatever. And I think in a lot of folks' mind, those ideas are secular. Whereas, I would fall in a camp, I would fall under a belief system that says everything good is from God. And so marketing is simply telling people about your product, or telling people about what you offer, and telling people who you are as an organization and what you stand for, and essentially a brand. Like, this is who we are, this is what we offer. So it's literally just communicating to somebody, here's who I am, here's what I do, here's who we are, here's what we do, here's what we offer. Come if you want to, but to your point, you don't have to come.
Right. You're not being forced to do anything.
Right. So stay home if you want to stay home.
Do you think that people that are offended by marketing with the church have not thought at all? How could you be offended by that when literally the church was founded, it started person-to-person marketing.
Yeah.
Very effective marketing. Hey, Jesus did this crazy thing, and he died, and now he's alive. And put your faith in him kind of deal, marketing. And effective marketing too. And marketing in different ways, like we talked about last week with Paul, with Gentiles a certain way, with Jews a certain way. Yeah. So, the most effective marketing, because it launched a crazy movement. So if you're upset about marketing, then maybe you should just be upset about the start of Christianity, or really any other major religion that's grown on some level at all, because that's how it's done from a person-to-person basis. Maybe taking the tools of modern technology and using things like, TV advertising or billboard advertising, whatever. Maybe that for some reason feels a little bit weirder for people, but it's no different than person-to-person marketing. It's just, hey, this is a thing, I wanted to get it to you so you can then make a decision on it.
Yeah.
Positive or negative, whatever.
Yeah. I think back to the emotionally vulnerable, targeting those folks, I think I'm less comfortable saying, yes, the church targets. I'm not comfortable with the word target, the emotionally vulnerable. In the sense that Zach says all people are emotionally vulnerable, I agree with that. And people are who we are, I suppose, targeting. So in that sense, I agree with it. But I definitely disagree with the premise that we're like, hey, we only exist for and we thrive off of, and we're tailoring our content to people who are emotionally vulnerable. I do think that we've had conversations at the Creek Church about who our target is, just to give us some clarity around decisions that we have to make, because there's so many ways you can go.
Right.
And really that's all been centered around, if a person is looking to improve their life in any way, if they're a person of vision, if they're a person who wants better in their marriage or their work, or be a better parent, or they just want to be better spiritually, or whatever, if they've got that in them at all, we feel like that's somebody that we can speak into and help and help progress their life along. And so I have no problem with saying, hey, we have a target, but I think to put the idea out there that, hey, all church and church music just targets those people who are emotionally vulnerable, I don't know, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Now, on the other hand, I agree with Zach in the sense, and you in the sense that, Jesus said, I came for those who are sick, not those who are healthy. So like, it's kind of like self-defeating in a way to say that, we're only here for them because, if you don't need help, then I guess we're not for you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But like, who doesn't need help? Who doesn't? But I do think, kind of shift this a little bit into some fun waters, I do think that particular branches of Christianity tend to appeal to the more emotionally vulnerable, or the more emotionally up and down than others.
What are those?
I want names of these churches. I want.
I guess I feel like the more charismatic churches and movements, that appeals more to that type of a person who's more emotionally driven, a more emotionally up and down, as opposed to, more of your fundamental or not really fundamental, but
Boring.
maybe more liberal. I guess if that's your perspective, if you're
Well, I'm more of a emotional person too,
Sure.
so I'm drawn more towards the charismatic thing,
Yeah.
just because that's how I'm driven. So
Yeah.
the other stuff is more boring to
Right.
me, but other people might love it. So
and I'll say this, I think there is a danger in that.
in what?
In folks who are struggling with their emotion, and they're high and low, and they're really looking for that emotional thing,
Mm-hmm.
I think there can be a danger in them attaching themselves to a movement like that.
Into a movement that's more emotional.
That's more charismatic, I might say.
I would say I would disagree.
Okay.
I would say there is a danger in attaching yourself to emotionalism, and there are certain aspects of the church and Christianity that I would say, okay, that's a bit more emotionalism than it is foundational faith.
So for people who don't know what you mean when you say emotionalism, how would you define that?
That's a tough definition.
You want me to Google it, see what they say?
I would be interested to see how Google defines that. But what you're saying, you're in it for a feeling. I'm trying to get a feeling, and if I don't get that feeling, then I'm not interested in this faith.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily about faith for me. I don't think they would say it in those words, but they would say this. I think it would be more like, they go to a church service. Yeah, I just didn't feel God in it. I didn't feel God in it. And so they would use that kind of language. Whereas, and I think that's dangerous, because we talked about last week, your feelings are not at all an accurate
Sure.
gauge of something as important as faith, and it can't be based on that. And so that's where I would say, as your highs and lows come, so your faith comes.
Yeah.
Rather than Jesus would say, if you want to follow me, you need to pick up your cross and follow me, or else you're not worthy of me. What that also communicates is you're going to go through pain, and it's essential.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to pick up your cross and follow me, that means you're picking up pain, and you're going to follow me through it, because I'm going through pain. And if you're going to go through pain, then you have to have already made up in your mind that I believe this, or you'll quit. Because pain, we all know, doesn't feel good.
Right.
Pain doesn't feel good. And so if you go through something that doesn't feel good, if you don't believe it, you'll quit. And Jesus actually called us to go through pain. And so he says, pick up your cross, follow me, or you're not worthy of me. So if you're attaching yourself to this belief system that is all about a feeling and all about emotionalism, and I'm not saying that the emotion isn't tied to faith, because I think it does. It's a part of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No different than worship in music isn't the only definition of worship.
Right.
It's the same thing. It is a part, but not a whole. And so I would say if your faith is tied to your emotions, that is unhealthy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certain, what's the word? There are certain avenues or streams of Christianity that are more emotional.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say if you're that kind of person who's looking for a feeling, you might find yourself in those more than others.
Yeah.
And so if those streams aren't teaching a foundational truth theologically that goes much deeper than your emotions, then I agree it's unhealthy.
Yeah.
So I would say the spiritual health of the person is what we're actually really talking about.
Yeah.
If you're spiritually healthy, then that's the important thing. And there's spiritually healthy people in every stream of Christianity, I would say.
Yeah.
From left to right, there's.
I agree with that. Yeah.
I think before we go any further, we should also probably let people know who don't that our church is full of people from all sorts of different church backgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
denominational backgrounds, however you want to.
Specifically staff.
Yeah, our
Yeah.
staff, and that's reflected in our people.
Mm-hmm.
And so also want to say that, throwing out a label like charismatic is not to say that anyone who identifies as part of a charismatic church or movement or whatever falls under, the category of, you're emotional or you're whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think just probably as an overgeneralization, as a generalization in general, that tends to be the case. So I don't want to throw everybody in that camp, in that boat. But
Well, anytime you speak generally, it's you're in murky waters.
Sure.
I mean, even this fella in the video that we've referenced, he has a tendency in this video to speak generally. He mentions in the clip we listened to that this is always geared towards young people, and he uses the word always. And anytime you speak generally like that, and that you're leaning into these murky waters because, I mean, it can't be. It has a hard time being true.
yeah. I think the reason to clarify why I said I think it's dangerous for people who are prone to those emotional ups and downs to be tied to that version of Christianity or sect of Christianity is because it seems to me that the emotionally, let's say the emotionally, I'm going to say emotionally unstable person, or person who is emotionally high and low, they're up and down, they are somewhat vulnerable with their emotions. They're a very emotional person. I feel like that person really, really needs some of that structure and some of that discipline and some of that steadiness that comes with maybe another version of following Jesus or
Not
church.
just in their faith expression, but in their life.
In
in
their
general.
life, yeah.
I agree with that.
So I've seen that. I think what I mean is I've seen that be dangerous. Like I've had a very close personal friend who I would describe like that, emotional, up and down, like high and low, and he would attend church with me, and I was at a, Lance said boring earlier, so I'll go with that. I was at someone.
Not all churches like that are boring.
That's
Let's
true.
clarify.
But I was at a church that was a little more boring and not modern in the sense of like up to date with music and all this kind of stuff. But I really had this strong feeling like he really needs this, because he needs some stability. He needs whatever. Mm-hmm. His family's in this other movement, and it's so, like he would go there some, and he would come back and he would be telling me about these experiences he had where he felt this stuff and this stuff happened. But it never appeared to. It was like it happened and then it was gone, And it was like he rode the high of that happening, but it didn't change anything about him. You know what I mean? It was like, I felt like I was like, man, he needs the stability. He needs the discipline. He needs the rock solidness of this. And so I guess over the years I saw that be damaging to him. And I'm not saying that it exclusively was damaging to him. He made some stupid decisions and all that too. So I'm not saying the church is responsible for people's individual decisions. But yeah, anyway, he's a friend that ultimately took his own life.
Golly,
So I've looked on that situation from numerous angles, and for whatever reason, that is something that's always kind of stood out to me because it was evident to me in the moment, like back then when I was in high school, and I was really pressed, I feel like, from the Lord to bring him along and get him engaged in something different. And it's like it just never would stick. He was in and out. And I always just had that sense of like, man, this thing that he's trying to be in is like in line with his personality, but not good for him right now.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's
I think
true or if that's just an isolated thing.
No, I think there's truth there. And I think, I can speak personally. I've been in many different churches that have many different expressions of faith, and they've all benefited me to some extent. And they've all led me to where I am now and made me who I am now. And so I think anytime you polarize yourself, you're leaving something out somewhere. And so there's benefit in all kinds of different things. And polarization can sometimes be a problem. And so I think also what we end up talking about, if we talk about this enough, we'll eventually start talking about the difference between spiritual gifts and spiritual fruit. Because that's what happens a lot of times is churches. That's probably not the right thing to say, but sometimes when you see a church operating in spiritual gifts a lot, people who have skepticism about that, what they end up saying is, I see that person day to day, Monday through Saturday, and they ain't holy.
Yeah.
Right.
So how is it that they're operating in these spiritual gifts, but I don't see any of what biblically we would call spiritual fruit?
Yeah.
Where's your character? Where's the character behind this?
Yeah.
Whereas you might also, in another expression, find people who have deep spiritual fruit, deep character, as far as what they've allowed God to move in them and the person that they've become. But maybe they don't operate in all of these very dynamic spiritual gifts. But that also doesn't mean the spiritual gifts don't exist.
Right.
And so no one would say, I believe in spiritual gifts, but I don't believe in spiritual fruit.
Sure.
But you do get people that say, I believe in spiritual fruit, but I don't believe in spiritual gifts, because that spiritual gift is an outward expression of something that then you can then judge and say, wait a second, I also know you on Tuesday, and I saw you cuss out the person who accidentally hit you with their buggy at the grocery store. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I think those things make all of this very, very difficult when you're talking about emotionalism, and you're talking about character, and you're talking about where people need to be as far as the season of the life that they're in and what could help them most.
Yeah.
Because, I think we would all agree counseling is a very, very healthy thing. Very few people, though, are in counseling their entire life. They go through seasons of counseling. They're in counseling for this, and then maybe they're in counseling for this, and maybe they go through a season where they're not in counseling. But it doesn't mean that counseling isn't benefiting them in general. So I think it's just such a broad thing, a broad topic of conversation. But I do want to ask you guys this, because while I was doing a little bit of research, I ran across this statement, and I wanted to hear what you guys think about it.
Hit us.
Vulnerability is a weakness. True or false?
False.
False.
Hard false.
Okay, but would you say a lot of people believe that vulnerability is a weakness?
Proud people, very proud people, I would say, probably could feel that way.
Yeah. So I think, my personal opinion is I agree with you guys. I think vulnerability is not a weakness. I think it's a strength. But I think people see vulnerability as a weakness. They see it as a weakness, generally speaking, I think. But this lady, if you read anything about vulnerability and emotional vulnerability, you'll find her name. I'm sure her name's Brene Brown. She says this, and I think this is maybe a talking point. She says, vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. That it's the actual birthplace of those things. Being willing to step into that place of vulnerability is actually where all of those things that I think we would all say these are beautiful things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That she says this is the birthplace. She's one of the main voices in this field. She has a TED Talk that has like 30 million views about emotional vulnerability. So I think she's probably a voice that can be trusted in this field. But I think that statement, according to her, there should be more vulnerability. Maybe we should all embrace a little bit more of emotional vulnerability.
I like the idea of that being the starting point a lot, in the sense of this: if you're vulnerable with yourself first, right? That means you're willing to accept the idea that, one, I don't have it all together.
Mm-hmm.
There's things I need to work on, and I'm open to maybe looking into that. I'm going to have some self-awareness that I can take a step back, look at who I am, be vulnerable enough to assess where I am. And then that being the starting point, you can then look for outside help through counseling, through close friends, whatever. Where am I weak?
Yeah.
How can I be better? And then take those lessons because of the vulnerability and become better and stronger,
Right.
and more effective in life, in every aspect of your life.
Yeah.
So I do like that aspect a lot, the whole like starting point thing with vulnerability. Another thing with the church preying on emotionally vulnerable or unstable, I would say that the people that are in that category are going to be some of the first ones to sign up to do stuff, but they're also probably going to be some of the first ones to leave when they don't get their way or they get offended or hurt. So if the church is specifically targeting those people who have high highs and low lows, it's really not a great business model because they're probably not going to be there long term, because eventually, if you're in church long enough, you're going to get your feelings hurt.
Yeah.
Because we're people with flaws,
Right.
and we're going to get it wrong.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure going to get it wrong. So those people are going to have the high highs, low lows, are going to be in and out of the door, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a horrible business model if you're targeting specifically to those people for
Yeah.
long-term growth in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I got nothing. I got nothing.
I think there's a distinction to be made around the word vulnerable. I don't know what it is exactly. I've been trying to think of what it is, but I think that there's like two different connotations. Definition is a vulnerability is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, and that's either physically or emotionally. So at first I was thinking, well, the distinction that I'm trying to make is about physical versus emotional. But then I was like, no, that's not it. I think the distinction that I'm trying to make is that you have to discriminate your vulnerability. And what I mean is maybe you shouldn't be equally vulnerable to all people at all times in all situations.
I think there's truth in that.
So like there's people, like I would be more vulnerable with you guys, not on this podcast with everyone else listening. You know what I mean?
No one else is here.
Yeah.
But
There are things that I would because I just think there are, and maybe we've used this analogy. I can't remember if I've told this on this podcast before, but Stephen Furtick, a pastor, talks about when you get wounds, and when you get a wound, you cover it up and you don't show it to everybody while it's still healing. And you may have a few close people in your life, like, your spouse or whoever, that's like, hey, let me see that thing. And you show it to them. But you don't go around
Right.
in public like, hey, everybody, look at these stitches or this nasty whatever that's healing. But then once it's healed, you take the Band-Aid off and everybody can see the scar.
Right.
And I think it's kind of the same thing. It's like that's a form of vulnerability. It's like, hey, he was equating that physical hurt to, our spiritual and emotional situations, saying, hey, it's not everybody doesn't need to know about the pain you're having right now. It was never meant for everybody to know.
Yeah.
So I think there are distinctions to be made with, like, you definitely don't want to just walk around airing everything out to everybody.
Right.
But knowing who can be trusted, who you can be vulnerable with. Certainly, I agree with the idea that not being vulnerable ever, that's going to get you basically nowhere.
Right.
And what I can't remember her name, but what she's saying, I definitely agree.
Yeah.
That without that vulnerability, we're not really going to progress. And seems very tragic. We're never really going to be known.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Nobody's ever going to know us.
If you're not
exactly right.
vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's exactly, and that's the difference between being physically vulnerable and then being emotionally vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Physical vulnerability puts you in harm's way.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're in the woods and you're walking through the woods and you break your leg. You're now physically vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
to harm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's no good that can come from that. Being emotionally vulnerable puts you in a place where you can be known by people and then also let them and then find out who they are.
Mm-hmm.
You can be known and also know.
Yep.
And with that comes all kinds of benefits of relation. There comes relational health, there comes trust, there comes all of these things that actually cause you to grow because you're allowing yourself to be known. I mean, all of us have some level of creativity in us. And we work in those streams, and so all of you guys know, as soon as you create something, the first time you let somebody see it, it's
the worst.
scary as all get out.
It's the worst.
Like, I don't want to let you see it, but as soon as you let them see it, you get feedback, and then whatever you've created becomes stronger. It
Yeah.
becomes better,
Yeah.
and you become a better creator. The next time you create something, you don't create it with the same mistake the first time through that you did that time.
Yeah.
You've become better because you allowed yourself to be vulnerable. And that's why emotional vulnerability is a healthy thing. That's something we should all strive for. And it's very different than physical vulnerability. Those two things are vastly different. One, I think, is puts you in harm's way. The other one puts you in health's way.
So
I can
you're
step into
okay making the distinction between physical and emotional. The reason in my mind, when I was trying to work that out, and I started there, I went on past it because I thought, okay, there are times actually when I'm dealing with, like, I can recall moments in my life where I was dealing with a person,
Mm-hmm.
and the person was capable of physically harming me.
Yeah.
And I feel like I put myself in a physically vulnerable situation. Literally, like, if they wanted to, they could have hurt me.
Sure.
For the sake of having a conversation with them about something that needed to be had, or was constructive, or was definitely confrontational. Like,
Yeah.
there was definitely the sense of, like, okay, they could get ticked off at me, and let's just be realistic. They're probably going to pummel me
Yeah.
if we get into a physical
You're a
altercation.
tough guy, though.
Well,
Look at that buzz cut.
yeah,
I
the
know,
buzz cut
who's gonna
helps,
mess with
and the
you?
beard.
Golly.
Like, I have really, like, my best friend ever in high school
Is
was
it not me?
no. I said in high school. I didn't know you in high school. Cole Drawn.
You should have known him.
Okay, he's my best friend. He was the football player, and he was much stronger than me, all of that. So, but there were times literally when we went toe to toe, because when you're friends, you get your arguments and whatever. And it's just kind
I
of
bet Young Up Church was just a firecracker, man.
I
Just
did-
absolute, no filter. We're just going to say the truth right now. And if it hurts your feelings, we'll deal with the consequences.
I definitely didn't back down. That was the worst thing ever. So I never backed down from him. So anyway, like, that's sort of a silly illustration, but there's definitely times where I feel like you make yourself physically vulnerable. Like, okay, let's say you need to have a really confrontational discussion, or you have a differing perspective than your direct supervisor
Yeah.
at work.
Yeah.
And to step into their office and have that conversation, you're being emotionally vulnerable, but you're also being physically vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
because they could get ticked off, tell you to go take a hike, and now you aren't getting paid, and you have physical repercussions in your life
Mhm.
and for your family.
Yeah.
So there's a vulnerability there that's physical, that's a little different, I think, than what we think of as maybe physical vulnerability, but it has physical implications
Yeah.
as well.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. They are.
Exclusive?
Yeah. Whatever that word. Whatever that word is.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Exclusive. But I mean, I think that doesn't mean that that the adverse of what we're saying isn't true.
Sure.
Because, obviously you gave two very, very different examples. One example is with your best friend who you have relational collateral with, and you can say almost whatever you want to your best friend and know, okay, I can be honest with this person. Now your boss, that's a different example, but still true.
Yeah.
And so there's varying degrees of truth inside of what we're talking about. And so I agree, and I also agree.
Well, I think it's another good example too of like those levels of people you would be vulnerable with. My best friend, I was willing to, even though he could take me out if he wanted to. Now
Is this guy the Mountain from Game of Thrones?
Basically,
like, who is your friend, dude? Like, you're not a weakling. I wouldn't look at you and say, man, Upchurch, well, that guy could get broken by anybody.
we're talking about 15, 20 years ago. So
Okay.
But I'm a USC fan. I like fighting, and there's fighters, out there who do that for a living, and I would not make myself physically vulnerable to any of them, regardless of how. Even if I just had a different opinion,
You just agree with everything.
just be like,
oh, so you're super racist. Okay, that's cool.
Yes, ma'am.
but I mean, it's an extreme hyperbolic situation to kind of illustrate the point of, there's definitely levels to the people you should choose to be vulnerable with.
I think that's wise.
Even biblically, it's true. Yeah. I mean, Paul was stoned because he went into a place.
The bad kind, the really bad kind of.
The worst kind of. Physical, yes. He was pelted with rocks. Is what we're
That's
saying.
a rough day at the office.
More than once.
Yeah.
More than once. And so he was physically harmed because he put himself in a position of obedience to say, you know what, I feel like this is what God has called me to. I'm going to go in and I'm going to say what I feel like needs to be said. So again, pick up your cross and follow me. Is the words of Jesus, and if you're not willing to do that, then you're not worthy of me. And so, as Christians, sometimes we do. Sometimes we are called to put ourselves into physically vulnerable places out of obedience. And I think that's what I would say is the importance of having an actual relationship with Jesus, one for yourself, where you can hear from him and he leads you. And if you've been listening to the Creek Church Online, we've been going through Psalm 23, and sometimes he leads you beside still waters, and sometimes he leads you through the valley of death. And the valley of death seems like a very vulnerable place to be.
Definitely.
But the beauty of it is he led you there. He didn't say go there and not go with you.
Yep.
He led you into it. And so I don't know, I would just say, yes, you're right. Sometimes those conversations that we have do end up putting us in a vulnerable place, both physically and emotionally, but it doesn't always mean they're wrong.
So the church targets the emotionally vulnerable. Still feel the same way you did when we started this conversation?
I think it's a yes. I think it is a yes, but I think it's more than just that.
And you're comfortable with the word targets?
I have no problem with marketing. I don't know why. I mean, maybe it's because I was a marketing degree in college, so like it's totally fine with me. I mean, I think if you don't have a target, you're not going to make the mark. I mean, if I'm not shooting at the basketball rim to go for the ball to go inside the rim, how am I supposed to make a basket?
That explains a lot. That you shoot for the rim explains a lot about your game.
Actually,
it explains a lot about your game.
It's really funny coming from you as many times as we play basketball. But for real, like, if you don't have a mark, if there's not something that you're aiming for.
Yeah, but I'm saying that category of person being the mark.
I think that category of person is a mark. It's not the mark. It's part of it. I mean, we're here to help people, and those people, if they are more susceptible to marketing or whatever, then they're just people, and if, I don't know, I think people get really grossed out about marketing and with anything with the church, and with the video we're drawing from, the whole arguments being brought from, we're trying to manipulate people. Who's the most vulnerable to manipulation? People who are emotionally unstable on some level. So in order to support his argument, they're the easiest target for his message.
Yeah.
But I think people, like Zach said, people are emotionally vulnerable whether they recognize it or not. And not all points in their life are they always that way. People are just going through stuff all the time, ups and downs. So I don't know. It doesn't bother me too much.
based on the fact that all people are emotionally vulnerable.
At some point, yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
and what we feel like we're targeting or marketing to these people is something that we believe is helping them. The mission's not evil. The mission's good. We want to help these people in some way, and show them maybe something different than what they've experienced before.
Does it make a difference that we are also and have been the emotionally vulnerable, and we're the ones leading those people too?
I think you get into the conversation of authenticity then.
Yeah.
Which is, I think it's involved in this conversation. While you were talking, I had an interesting thought. Well, it was interesting in my head. Maybe it's not interesting what to say it. But here's
That remains to be seen.
Yeah. Think about this, right? If you think about, I'm still thinking about Psalm 23, but there's a what is a pack of sheep? Is it a pack?
Sure.
A herd?
Flock?
Herd.
Flock.
Flock?
Yeah,
Okay.
lead your flock. Duh. Wow.
Okay.
Good job,
I'm
Lance.
thinking of like a flock of
Seagulls.
geese or
A flock of
doves
seagulls.
or something. Yeah. Flock of
No,
yeah,
no,
it's a
no.
flock.
Think about this.
Yeah.
Think about this. There is a group of sheep. One
A group. You ask what
It's
they're
a
called, and then
herd.
you called them a
It's
group.
a herd.
It
It's a
felt weird.
group.
It
A
felt weird.
flock.
A circle
Flock
of
of
them.
sheep. Flock of sheep. One ends up with a broken leg. If there is a wolf around watching that flock, he's now going to target the one that's broken.
Mm-hmm.
So is the
Ooh,
shepherd.
I like that.
So is the shepherd.
Yeah.
They're both targeting the same one.
I like that.
They're both after the one that's hurt. And I would say, if you want to say the church is targeting emotionally vulnerable people, I don't think I would put emotionally vulnerable in there. I would say emotionally vulnerable falls into the group of people that we are targeting, which is hurting people, which is every person to ever walk the planet of Earth.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's interesting because the wolf who is there to hurt and harm and kill and destroy is after the same thing as the one that's there to protect and heal and get you back to where you need to be, which is with the group.
Mm.
And I think that's an interesting thought, and something that we have to say, yes, we're targeting, and we're targeting the same person all the time.
I love that.
So I don't know.
It's like a race to the, you know what I mean? The same target. You're like, it's a race against.
That's right.
It
I
makes
love
the
it.
shepherd a defender instead of a offender.
He's not there to devour.
Yeah.
There is a devourer,
Yeah.
but it's not the shepherd.
Right.
The shepherd is there to protect and bring you back into health.
Mm-hmm.
The devourer is there to devour you and take advantage of you and feed himself because of you at your own harm. And so I think it's interesting that they both have very, very different point of views and ultimate goals.
Yeah.
But
The
they're
intentions
after,
are evil.
but they're after the same thing.
Yeah.
Very different intentions after
Yeah.
the same goal.
Yeah.
And so, does the church target emotionally vulnerable? To that, I would say yes. Does the church target emotionally healthy? To that, I would say yes.
Yes.
Does the church target humanity? I hope so.
In what sense does the church target the emotionally healthy?
If you're emotionally healthy, then you can. Okay, what's that? Hurting people hurt people.
Mhm.
Is the adverse to that true? Healed people help people.
Healed people heal people.
Is that true?
I mean,
If that's
it
true,
makes sense.
if I've been through something that you're going through,
Mm.
if I'm in a relationship with you, the chances of me helping you through it are higher. And so, do we target people who have been through stuff? Absolutely, because they can help their neighbor.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you said emotionally healthy, right? That's
Yeah.
what you're saying.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm
I
okay
like
with
it.
that. I'm good with that.
Hey, I don't know if we're about to wrap up or not, but this might be a conversation for another day. But I don't use the word best friend, and I have
Best
pretty strong feelings about it.
Let's hear about it.
Okay, I don't use the term best friend because I don't like putting that label on a person who is emotionally
Let me tell you something.
up and
Lance.
down.
Let me
And you're
tell you
saying
something.
this because I referenced
you
my
use
best friend.
a lot when you were talking, and I don't like putting that label on somebody. I think whether you want to use the best friend term or not, yeah, that's fine. It's your choice. But
Is it?
for me, I like using the word close friend because I have tons of close friends, the inner circle people. And what I've come to grips with is that circle will change over time based on where I am in my life, where I'm living physically. I have close friends, and maybe say, for example, when I was in college, I had some really close friends.
Yeah.
I could have slapped the word best friend on those people if I wanted.
No, you
Well,
couldn't.
I'm
You could only
not-
slap that on one of them.
Okay.
Is your wife your best friend?
If that's how I use it. That's how I use it. I say, the only time I say best friend is my wife. But people use it for, like, same-sex person all the time, as their buddies or their girlfriends, whatever. They like to use that word. I say close friend because it changes. I have very close friends from Western Kentucky where I went to school, but we're not close friends anymore.
Right.
We're friends, and when we're around each other, it's wonderful. But I'm not checking in on them every day. My life isn't around them. I think proximity has a lot to do with how close you are to somebody. I'm literally. So, I mean, you guys would be considered close friends for me.
It's like the guy who would have been in your wedding if you'd gotten married 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It's different than the guy who would
Yeah.
if you married now.
Yeah. I had two best men, actually, in my wedding.
Best friends?
That's
They were the best men in my wedding. I know, it's a whole nother thing.
that doesn't make any sense.
Well, it was because
why
Kara-
weren't they called two close men?
Because Kara, my wife Kara, has two sisters, and they were both, matrons of honor.
Yeah.
So I had two best men because of it. But
Men of honor.
basically, I don't know. I don't like slapping that label on people because I think it changes. And your best friend might be on the other side of the world and you never really talk to each other. I know for guys, they don't a lot of times.
Are you wanting to be my best friend?
You are one of my close friends.
I want you to know
But
this,
I'll be
Lance.
honest with you. When you moved to Somerset, you hurt a lot of people's feelings.
Did you guys ever watch that show on MTV called Robin Big?
Yes.
Robin Big.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Yeah,
Rob Deerdeck.
I didn't lay my eyes on such, Phil.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, yeah.
I did. Don't tell my mom.
You've been cussing and you've been watching MTV.
No, just kidding. No, he's a skater. Rob is a skater,
yeah,
and
I
also
gotcha.
he owns a clothing brand and all this stuff. But Big was his security.
Yeah.
Or
Or TV security personality.
yeah. So they had a show where they would just hang out, but the intro was, "People, let me tell you about my best friend." All I'm thinking about when you're talking about best friend is
Yeah.
like Robin Big. You need to, if you've never seen it, you need to look up the promo of that show. It's hilarious.
I'm sure I do.
Yeah.
Well, I am still super comfortable calling Cole Drawn my best friend in high school.
Oh yeah, there you
In
go.
high school?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you weren't saying that every time you were talking about this guy.
I
When you were
understood
talking
it to be
just
that.
then.
I understood it to be that because I know that I'm his best friend now. So
Gosh, oh, wow. Anyway,
Should you tell him on the podcast?
also,
Austin?
Lance, I know that I'm your best friend too.
I think
don't tell,
I think
don't tell Tom.
I think scripturally your argument breaks down when John refers to himself as the disciple that Jesus loved.
Golly.
Maybe we need to talk about that sometime because there's
Maybe we
all
should.
kinds of good in there.
That is good. I think we pulled a few different topics out today.
Yeah,
Spiritual gifts versus spiritual
fruit.
fruit. We could definitely
There's something there.
talk more about
There's
that.
lots there.
And
I feel like this is the first time I've heard this.
this?
Is this different?
No, it's the outro, baby.
I
Make
like
sure and tell your friends about this podcast that is yet to be named. But let them know. Share it on Facebook. I saw a lot of people doing that. I really appreciated it. Let's get the word out.
And
we're having fun
I
with
want
it.
to say this too. If you comment, I don't have Facebook, but if you comment on the YouTube videos, I'm gonna do my best to talk to you on there because I think that's really, really cool. I got to talk to a guy on there the other day, and it was fun.
Shout out to Mike Ledford too. He's been going pretty hard. Appreciate
Yeah,
that guy a
legend.
lot.
Thanks for
Legend.
watching. Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, share, all that good
Yeah.
stuff.
Watch.
And I can promise you
Listen.
this. If you make a comment on YouTube, all of you will be Lance's best friend.
Oh.